Yeah, thank you all for having me here tonight. I really appreciate the time. And if you give me a couple of seconds here, I just want to make sure that everybody kind of knows where I'm coming from. My name is Brian Sullivan. I'm the president of the Nassau County Correction Officers Benevolent Association. I am also a lieutenant for the Sheriff's Department. I've worked here for getting on for 32 years. And I've seen a lot go on here in the last 32 years, but stuff that's gone on in New York State legislatively in the last year and a half, 2 years is shocking, and it should be shocking to especially all of us here on Long Island. It should be shocking to all New Yorkers because we didn't just get to a precipice and change the way we're doing things. In my opinion, we fell off a cliff here, and we need to have a little bit of a voice of sanity. I'd like to just to give a little bit of background. Has anyone ever heard of the Lippman Commission? And I know I wouldn't get a response on that. The Lippman Commission was put together by the New York City Council back in 2013, headed by former New York State Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman. The purpose of this commission was to study Rikers Island, what could be done with Rikers Island, study criminal justice reforms, and a lot of reforms needed to be done. Don't get me wrong, there's always room for reform. But what can we do with Rikers Island? Rikers Island is just this, they make it seem like it's Devil's Island, where it's just this punishment place where people are going and they end up languishing. But the mandate that they were given from the city council, its key component and mandate was first and foremost, how do we close Rikers Island? Now, back in 2013, Rikers Island had probably, and I'll include all of city corrections in this, they had probably 12 to 14,000 inmates, going just depending on the circumstances. And the first thing that came to all of us with this is, if they're going to close Rikers Island, where are you going to put 10,000, 12,000 inmates that are on Rikers Island? So it became pretty evident that what's going on in our society is that we're just going to decriminalize everything. We don't want to pay for incarceration. We want to put together a commission to find out how we can get all these people out on the street and not have to pay for incarceration, not have to pay for programs, not have to pay for whatever else, get them out. Now, this commission had 27 people on it. And I'll give you some of the names of some of the in partnership with the key organizations that this Lippman Commission was included with was the Vera Institute. The Vera Institute is a very progressive, let's say left-wing organization that is all about decriminalizing everything. We have mass incarceration in this country. We have to get everybody out of jails. I'll get onto that in a second. Latham Watkins Law Firm, Forest City Ratner, and HR&A Advisors, all allegedly to provide policymakers with the tools and roadmaps they need to implement criminal justice reforms and recommendations. And most importantly, how do we close Rikers Island? Why close Rikers Island? There are those that believe in what I call the myth of mass incarceration. Some people in this room may disagree with me, and I fully expect it, because we always hear about, in the criminal justice system, mass incarceration in this country. We have to end mass incarceration. There's people languishing all over our country in jail because they're poor and can't afford bail. It's a racial issue. It's a rich versus poor issue. The truth is that prior to January 1st of this year, and I'm going to throw a couple of different statistics at you, and I hope you follow me. Prior to January 1st of this year, approximately 70% of all people that were arrested in this state, we'll just keep it to this state, for misdemeanors and what are considered nonviolent felonies, were released almost immediately or soon after their arrest, either on their own recognizance or on bail, pending their criminal trials. 70%. The other 30% were evaluated under a judge's discretion for their risk of flight, their criminal record, and the probability of returning to court. That's it. There was no risk to public safety component, and we had always tried to get a public safety component put into judge's discretion. It's not in the law, and they weren't able to do it. But the judges, up until January 1st of this year, had discretion over these cases. The truth is that the incarceration rate, and that's not the crime rate. I'm talking from my end of it because I work in corrections, is the incarceration rate. The commissioner can speak about crime rates. The incarceration rate in this country has decreased dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, mostly because of liberal attitudes towards crime and punishment, and most definitely because of initiatives that were put in place by people like Commissioner Ryder and other law enforcement agency. A lot of crime initiatives, anti-crime initiatives. Crime has been down, and the incarceration rate has been down, mostly because they want to get people out of jail so they don't have to pay for them. City corrections in the bad old days, and I know I'm talking a little bit about city, but it all translates. City corrections in the bad old days, say 20, 25 years ago, they used to have 20,000+ inmates in city corrections. Up until this year, because of the last 5 or 10 years, the incarceration rates have been dropping. There's only been about 5,000 to 10,000 inmates, fluctuating at any given time. Nassau, for the overwhelming majority of my career here, and it's getting on for 32 years now, has been anywhere between 1,500 and 1,800 inmates over the course. When I first started here 30+ years ago, there was over 2,000 inmates here because of the crack and AIDS epidemic. Crack was huge here, and there was a lot of problem with drugs. And I'm sure the commissioner was very aware of it. He worked in the city police before this. For the last 4 or 5 years, the Nassau County Jail has been anywhere between 1,100 and 1,200 inmates. Why do I bring up Rikers Island here in Carle Place, Long Island, and the Lippman Commission? Those law firms that were partners with them in this commission, in this study, and how to close Rikers Island. Does anybody have any idea what those law firms specialize in? Real estate. Real estate. Thank you. One of the biggest things that these law firms do is real estate. Now, what started going on in Rikers Island was, how can we close Rikers Island? What is Rikers Island? It's a beautiful island that overlooks Manhattan. Lots of waterfront property on Rikers Island, right? It's landfill. Once they started getting into a lot of this stuff, they have a bit of a methane problem there because it was landfill, and maybe they can't use it because they'd have some problems. City correction officers, some of them have become ill with methane gas. Then they switched from a real estate component of building high rises and condos and things like that to let's sell it off to put it in with the Port Authority and put runways for LaGuardia Airport. So that should raise a lot of specter with a lot of people here is, what does criminal justice reform have to do with major real estate law firms that are on a commission? Everybody follow me so far? I've been on my own personal crusade for the last couple of years about, and our local legislators. I have Laura Schaefer, unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and the commissioner has been on several legislative meetings, exposing the fact that there are many criminals who've been getting released from arraignment court over the last few years. This is all being done from the state level down through the courts. They don't want to house people because they don't want to pay for incarceration. And a lot of this has grown out of the Lippman Commission. A lot of it it's gone into some of our, all over the state because of state aid and things like that. They don't want to pay for incarceration. These people have been getting released from arraignment court, not seeing jail pending their trials for charges that, in my mind, were quite alarming, especially over the last few years. Heavy-duty drug dealers, high-level robberies, burglaries, gun charges. Like I said, this was all coming down from the state and state courts imposing their will on the local courts, where we've all seen it. I've seen it. New York State's a very liberal state, as we know. It's been doing its best to decriminalize lower-level crimes, maybe some not so level. As I was waving that flag for some time, trying to say that this is not good for Long Island, not good for our communities. In fact, crime is down. The commissioner can attest to that again, like I said. But the ones that do get arrested were being let go, at least pre-trial, pending any deals or whatever if they had their trials and they were convicted. While all this was going on, conservative state legislators, both Republican and Democrat, and I don't want to make it seem like it's pretty obvious that I'm more conservative in my thinking, but I'm not bashing any one particular party here too much. But both Republican and Democratic legislators were holding back a growing movement before last year of very progressive legislation that would, if passed, basically throw out the criminal justice system as we know it with the bathwater out the window in favor of this utopian idea that everybody's misunderstood. Even though crime is down, you shouldn't hold people because they're merely charged with a crime, and I do understand that. Just because you're charged with a crime doesn't mean you're guilty, but there are also some very, very heinous crimes that there has to be a public safety component attached to this. But that in a progressive movement, no, there's none of that. Everybody should get out. And until they're convicted, and even when they're convicted, they shouldn't get that much. Thankfully, all that legislation up until 2 years ago was kept at bay. Now, until last year, when we saw a dramatic swerve, in my words, off the rails occur in our state after an election that saw the Democratic Party take complete control of the state. They took over the Senate, which means the Democrats are in charge of the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's office. But again, it's not just a Democrat-Republican issue. Both Republicans and moderate Democrats lost in the New York State, giving way to a very progressive wave of changes in New York State government. Not only do you have interest groups like real estate investment groups vying for property rights to things like Rikers Island under this false narrative of criminal justice reform, you also have New York State progressive legislators who truly believe that reform means that almost no crimes are too heinous to warrant pretrial detention, whatever pending trial. The same legislators who think that cop killers should be released on parole and given the right to vote. I'm sorry, but maybe that's my conservative thinking, but I don't think cop killers should be released at all, let alone given the right to vote. This is where we landed last April in New York State, where this new state legislature pushed forward major criminal justice reform agenda. Unfortunately, the way this aggressive agenda was put forth was through the state budget process instead of through individual legislation. Now, what does that mean? Why did they put it through the state budget process? That means that there were no stakeholders allowed to speak up on this issue. There were no public hearings, no opportunities for public hearings. No voice of dissent was allowed to be heard over what was being proposed, and our state legislators, including all 6 of Long Island's Democratic legislators, by the way, who all voted in favor of these reforms as part of the overall budget process. I was in Albany all of the beginning, the winter and the spring of 2019, with members of a downstate correction coalition which encompasses Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester officers, superior officers, New York City corrections, and New York State corrections. We have a coalition that represents over 50,000 correction officers in New York State. We were up there banging on every single door of the legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, saying, you guys are marching off a cliff because you don't understand what you're doing here. You're going to be putting people in danger. At the very least, if we're going to have legislative reforms on bail because people can't afford bail, that's fine. Address that. The example that a lot of people bring up is Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein, all the horrible stuff he's accused of, he got $1 million bail, he's out. I agree. He's out. Maybe he should be sitting somewhere because he could potentially be a menace. But that doesn't necessarily mean, from my perspective, that somebody that's in on a $250 bail or a $500 bail should be languishing in jail for 6 months every year. It doesn't equate. That shouldn't be happening either. And just because you can't afford a $250, $500 bail or a $1,000 bail for something that's not obviously as egregious as Harvey Weinstein, you shouldn't be sitting in jail forever. I agree with that 100%. But address that issue, address that inequity in bail reform. And then there's other things about discovery that I'm sure the commission will get to in a little bit. Tectonic changes happen in the criminal justice system, including reforms such as bail reform and discovery reform that were pushed through, again, with no notice to the public. No one in here was ever made aware of it. No hearings and no opportunity to expose very dangerous things that will result from these changes. Now, what's happened so far? In Nassau County, as well as all over New York State, you may have seen on local news that due to bail reform, thousands of inmates in our local jails, including approximately 300 in Nassau County Jail, were released for a wide range of crimes, including residential burglaries, robberies, robbery in the second, that's robbery with a weapon, crimes against children, including assault, A, B, C, and D felony drug sales charges. We all heard the opioid crisis on Long Island. People are dying left and right from opioids. A, B, C felony drug sales are all exempt from bail or pretrial detention. The only drug crime that you could be held for in New York State is a major drug trafficker, El Chapo, that type of guy, or maybe top MS-13 guys that are importing tons of cocaine and opiates onto Long Island. Weapons charges. Numerous gang members. It's been in the paper that 61 gang members were released on Long Island because of bail reform. The court started doing this, and this is not a local administration problem. I don't blame Nassau County government for this. This is a state legislative issue. But the court started releasing people November 1st instead of January 1st. They were getting a lot of pressure from the state court system to let people go because why? These changes went into effect, and they knew everybody in all of our counties across New York State would lose their mind if they saw dozens, if not hundreds of inmates being released on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, in my instance in Nassau County, running up Common Avenue down along Eisenhower Park or out in Riverhead. That would have been a public relations nightmare. So let's start funneling these guys out. Going back to that date also is in arraignment court, they're just not holding people with severe crimes. I'll get into that in a second. MS-13's Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings were all released for various crimes, many of them drug-related. The commissioner, again, I keep deferring to him. He was on Fox and Friends recently on an interview regarding Chileans that were here committing burglaries all over the North Shore. They were arrested, they were released, and to use his phrase, they're probably right now, they're sitting on a beach in Chile. They're gone. Oceanside stabbing suspects, everybody was released except for one. In arraignment court now, like I said, every day, almost every police prisoner brought in that wasn't issued a desk appearance ticket, which is the number one thing. There's the police and the police commissioner can speak on that. They're supposed to be issued a desk appearance ticket except for certain high-level crimes. All police prisoners that are brought in the overwhelming majority of them are being released ROR, released on their own recognizance. Remember, under these bail reforms, judges have no discretion whatsoever to hold anyone based on their criminal record, their rap sheet, their tendency to commit certain crimes, or their potential danger to the community. They cannot be forced into mental health programs or be seen by psych doctors or placed into drug rehabs. They are simply released back into the community. That, in my mind, I don't know how that could possibly be a progressive agenda when people that are in need, including perpetrators of crimes that are mentally ill or addicted to drugs, and they're committing crimes not of their own volition, but because they're ill. When they come into facilities such as mine, they're put in mental health programs. They're mentally evaluated. Their medications are evened out. They're put in drug programs. Now, with all this progressive stuff, because people don't belong in jail, just kick them out in the street. I'm a little older. Some people are very young in here. You remember the old Willowbrook days when they didn't want to have the horrors and all of that. We don't want to put people, lock them up in mental institutions. Where do you think all the people with mental problems ended up since Willowbrook was closed? They end up in jail because there's no place else to put them. And in jails, we have programs to do the best to help them. Now we're kicking them out of the jails and saying this is progressive. Examples of what goes on in arraignment court every day. People that are walking out the door released on their own recognizance for assaults, weapons possession, menacing charges, robberies, burglaries. Specific ones that I have from a spreadsheet that I have: reckless assault of a child, released on their own recognizance; menacing in the second, harassment in the second; aggravated harassing, stalking; assault with strangulation in the second are awarded as a hate crime. Strangulation as a hate crime. All the hate crimes that are, and I'm going to give you, after I'm done here, I'm not going to do whatever. I have 4 pages from the DA's office in Queens of crimes that are now not under bail reform. They cannot be given bail, and they have to be released on the least restrictive means possible to hopefully assure their return to court, which in some cases means an ankle bracelet. And in Nassau County, if you're released from Hempstead Court, you're told, go over to Mineola and get an ankle bracelet when you're mentally ill or high on drugs or looking for a fix. Is anybody going from Hempstead District Court to Mineola to get their ankle bracelet? No. Are they putting anybody in from probation in Hempstead District Court? No. So that person walks out the door and disappears. Obstruction of breathing, assault in the third, assault in the second, possession of a weapon, assault, possession of a weapon, possession of a weapon, assault in the second, reckless endangerment, endangering the welfare of a child, stalking, aggravated harassment, assault in the third, menacing. All of these charges, people are walking out the door every day from Hempstead District Court, arraignment court. As I said, I'm going to have these handouts. By all means, when you come up at the end, I'm not going to walk around. They'll be up in the front here. Under the penal law, the legal definition of crimes that are on the list as classified as nonviolent felonies are on this list. This is what the list looks like. There's 4 pages of this. I highlighted all the ones that you're going to be amazed what people walk out the door with. I'm not going to go through them now, see them at your leisure. But those in the penal law, it's actually a bit of a misnomer, are classified as nonviolent felonies. So when the progressive people behind this and the media tells you this is only nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors. Nothing to be seen here. Take a look at what nonviolent felonies really means. And that's a lie too, because there are some very violent felonies that people are being held on and the judges are releasing them because of the mandate that they be released on the least restrictive means possible. Sometimes that's just ROR for certain types of sex crimes and all things like that. I mean, selling guns and drugs on school grounds, that's in here. You'll be amazed when you see it. All I could ask from being here tonight, and I thank you all for listening to my presentation, is please educate yourself on this issue. Google it. Don't just look at, there's nothing to be seen here. Educate yourself on it. Ask your local police officer, ask the DA's office, ask anybody that works in corrections. Educate yourself to exactly what these new bail and discovery laws mean. The commission will, I believe, is going to touch on discovery. That's more on his end. Demand accountability from your state representatives. Ask your state representative this: if you believe that these reforms are for the benefit of the poor and minorities, then why are these alleged criminals being released back into our communities with no mental health or drug addiction treatment, left to fend for themselves? What happens when they go back out in the street and they fend for themselves? They become public safety problems. And that's where I come in. That's where the police come in. That's where the DA's office comes in. And it's now a revolving door. We don't want them in. We don't want to pay for programs. We don't want to pay for incarceration, just kicking them out in the street. What's the mindset behind it? Hopefully they'll just die and go away. That's not very progressive. I urge you to call your state senator. Tell all your friends, your family, everybody you know. Get on Facebook. There is a Facebook page that was started by a sheriff in Washington County, New York, called Repeal Bail Reform Now. He started this. It's a county of 65,000 people upstate. He started it, and within 6 hours, a week and a half ago, he had 30,000 people on his page. Right now, it's getting to be 150,000 people across New York State. Every county, every sheriff, police upstate, they're posting all these articles on there, and the people that are behind this are saying we're all fear-mongering. This is just fear-mongering. Look at what's actually going on and the people that they're releasing. The guy that was arrested how many times for DWIs out in Shirley, and he killed that poor guy. And now they just issued a warrant for his arrest because he didn't show up to court. That was, I believe, his third DWI since Christmas.
I'll break the news. We just locked him up. I just got that. But guess what? He's going to get released tomorrow because there's no bail for those on violation of parole.
No means to hold.
I just literally got that. You broke my story, though, Brian.
I'm sorry. I'm a little long-winded. I'm sorry. What I could ask you is get educated on this. Call your local state representative. Call your assembly person. Call your state senator. And I'm asking, once you're educated, and hope you just don't look at it from our perspective, ask, as we're demanding, and I'm going to be in Albany, to repeal bail reform, first of all, which is going to be one hell of a mountain to climb because there's a lot of people digging their heels in on this. The assembly in New York State is not playing ball. They're saying we're fear-mongering, or they're just digging their heels in. You got to wait and see how it works. But it has to be addressed in a public forum, such as this, with public hearings that include law enforcement professionals, district attorneys, sheriffs, police commissioner, mental health professionals, drug addiction professionals, as what should have been done the first time, not hidden in the budget where nobody could see it, and we just pushed this mountain of an agenda through, and now we're all left with the aftermath. At the very least, demand that these laws, and I ask you when you call your legislator, that these laws be immediately amended to reflect that a judge will have discretion over the dangerousness of the individual and what his or her risk to public safety is. The judges have absolutely no discretion over the risk to public safety of letting somebody go like that gentleman that had, I believe it's 3 DWIs since Christmas. He killed the other guy, and they're going to let him go tomorrow. Like I said, this is the laws that was put together by the Queen's DA's office. It was on their page for a while. It somehow disappeared because they got a new progressive DA in Queens, so this thing disappeared off their website. But this was done by Executive Assistant DA James C. Quinn. There is also a handout that I have from the Center for Court Innovation regarding New York's bail reform law, summary of the major components, what it's all about. This is prior to bail reform becoming in effect. This is right from New York City. It's a leading in a historic decarceration plan. This is pre-bail reform. When they keep talking about mass incarceration, 1991, 2019. When they tell you that there's mass incarceration in this country, in this state, they're lying to you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. We'll have some questions after you.
So my name is Pat Ryan. I'm your police commissioner here in Nassau County. And I want to start off by telling you this. You live in the safest county for its size in the country, hands down. We did that and got there with less police officers. Not that we want to be that way, but that's what was handed us. But how do you get there doing it? Intelligence-led policing, focusing on those that are those criminals, or those bad weeds in the garden. You pluck them out, and then the garden grows healthy, right? So we zero in on top offenders or persons of interest. All of that is now gone out the window. And with not just bail reform, this is called justice reform, right? There's other things like discovery, which I'm going to walk you through and explain it to you. But the individual Jordan, who got arrested in Suffolk County, who hit this 27-year-old man and killed him, was released on bail, had 2 prior arrests here in Nassau County. He was given the interlock device. He was put on probation. All the things that the system was built to do to protect you from that drunk driver coming out and doing exactly what he did when he hit the man out east. He got released. We picked him up about 2 or 3 hours ago on a violation of probation warrant. We're almost positive the judge does not have the authority to hold him tomorrow. Your district attorney is working hard creatively to come up with a solution to try to remand him and hold him. I don't know if we're going to be successful, but that's where we're looking at, and that's just to give you a start. So I'm going to talk about a couple of people and then kind of walk you through something. Robert Conway. Robert Conway broke into a couple of places, commercial burglaries right here in Westbury. He gets arrested. He comes into our system. We process him. We give him the appearance ticket and let him out. Robert Conway then goes and commits another burglary at the Bagel Boss after he gets out. We arrest him again. We lock him up. He is now out, but he's getting the help that he needs now because of his family. Chaminade graduate, VMI college guy, kids who got it all going on. There's a problem there. The system has been built for hundreds of years in the criminal justice to protect those people, not just to throw them in behind the bars. Rehabilitation, get them into programs. Maybe it's mental health court, diversion court. All of that now goes out the window because Mr. Conway should have been in front of the judge. And that judge should have said, okay, are we going to get him some help, release him to the parents, and the parents then bring him and get him that help that he so much needed. Instead, we didn't do that. So instead, he commits another burglary. Mrs. Campione, the woman that you all heard, did some graffiti in Oceanside on a bank. She gets arrested. It would have been an appearance ticket, absolutely. She got an extensive criminal history. We might have kept her, we might not, but she probably would have got an appearance ticket. She walks out of the building with that appearance ticket, goes down to Hewlett High School, breaks into the school, does some damage, and then pulls the fire alarm. When you pull a fire alarm, the firemen and the cops come, and they come fast. People are endangered. Their life is put on the line trying to get there for the fire. She gets arrested. She gets let out again with another appearance ticket. She then goes to Wantor. She breaks the front glass of a 7-Eleven store. Finally, we got her in where she's trying to get some help. Should have happened the first time. Again, because those courts, like diversion court for drug use, are not there. Drug dealer sells drugs on the street before January 1. I'm a drug dealer. I make the sale. That's a B felony. I sell 2 vials of crack to Brian. Brian's the drug user. Brian has a problem. We arrest Brian. We put him in front of Judge Sullivan, who's the diversion court judge. And he says, look, son, you can go on with this criminal record and go to jail, or you can go to this rehab, this program, and if you go those routes, come back in a year, you stay clean, well, good. We'll erase the criminal record. That's what you do with a drug addict. You help them. You don't incarcerate them. That doesn't fix their problem. But instead, Brian doesn't get to go to see the diversion court judge because we release him. And better yet, me, the drug dealer, I get released too with Brian. So now Brian still needs his fix, and I still got a load of cocaine that the cops didn't get, and I'm hitting O'Brien 2 hours later after walking out of court. We set up a program in Nassau County called Operation Natalie after Natalie Siapa, young girl. It's now almost 11 years since Natalie died in a cold garage floor in Seaford on a drug overdose. Brought the attention to, like, oh my God, not my child. I wear the band that her father gave me that says not my child. I've been wearing that band for years now. And it represents what Natalie should not have died. She was this 18-year-old beautiful girl that got addicted to drugs. If the programs that we put in place today was back then, maybe Natalie'd be alive today. But now we've taken all those options off the table because we're not bringing them into the system. The Speaker of the Assembly, and make no doubt about it, that's up north. That's where this is coming from. This is not Nassau County laws. This is the state laws. The Speaker of the Assembly says, we need more time to see how this is going to play out. You got to give it time to play out. Tell that to the 27-year-old man that is now dead because of that drunk driver. Tell that to the burglaries and the victims that have been burglarized and houses have been broken into. And sometimes those people, those subjects that we've arrested, they're victims. They're victims because they need help. And we don't give them help because we turn them back out on the street. The 2 Chile burglars, they come here on a 90-day vacation visa. Done every year, right around daylight savings time. Chile sends these bad guys that are burglars in Chile, not Chile the government, but they send up some guys, they fly in on 90-day visas. They wreak havoc on the North Shore of Nassau County. Multiple million-dollar burglaries and proceeds out of these homes. We got town hall meetings. People are screaming and yelling. What are we doing? Our safety on the streets. We make the arrest. We lock them up. We got them. We got the evidence. We throw them into jail. It's retroactive. So they go back in, even if you arrested before January 1, the system goes back and says, these 2 gentlemen, poor gentlemen, don't belong here. We should let them out. So we go now, and the judge lets them out. And then they tell them, go tomorrow to probation and get your electronic monitoring bracelet that will put on your ankle. Guess who didn't show up the next day? And like I told Brian Kilmay over in Fox News, I said, they're sitting on a beach in Chile with the $1 million in proceeds they stole from us and drinking their latte, watching Fox 5, giggling at us because that's how ludicrous we've gone in the extreme right now. Now I'm going to take you a different path, discovery. Every single arrest that is made, within 15 days, I got to turn everything over. So I'll give you an example, a routine drug arrest on the street. I got to turn over all my 911 calls. Any 911 calls related to it, I got to turn it over. Then I got to turn over any radio communications that was made during that time. I got to turn it over. I got to turn all the paperwork over. I got to turn the victim's information over. Okay? If a woman is raped in her home, the subject has the right to go back and visit that crime scene within 15 days of that victim being raped in that room. Now we got to turn over all the paperwork, all the video, all the GPS data from my police cars. We got to turn over anything that touches every single cop's memo book, everything. I have 30 analysts that did the great civilian analysts that did the great work to help me reduce this crime. Intelligence-led policing that we brag about all the time. Every single one of them right now is doing discovery so we can make the court date on time. And if we don't make it, they get kicked out. And instead of going after and analyzing the crime data that made us so successful to lower the crime numbers, they're not doing that job. And we had to hire 5 additional people. And now we're looking to hire even more people to do some of the photo work and video work that needs to be done. Albany didn't give us a dime to do this, not a dime. So there's no money to do it. We got to live within our budget that we get from the county. So you could see the complications in this. I get justice reform. And you heard Brian say it a minute ago, I don't want to put an 18-year-old kid in jail because he can't make his $500 bail because he's been arrested for a bag of cocaine. I don't. I want to go back to his parents, maybe get him into a program and get him some help. I don't want to take a 15-year-old kid who can't make his 17-year-old kid who can't make the $250 worth of bail to sit in my jail and then bring him over to the courts the next day because he can't make his bail. I don't want to do that.
That's what justice reform is meant. Fix those mistakes that we've made. But we're in the business of law enforcement for, I think in the NYPD started in 1844, 1845. We started in 1925. We're supposed to learn from our mistakes. Study, I'm in the school here, right? I'm good. Study our history so we don't repeat the same mistakes, right? So we've done that. We're at record low crime numbers, off the chart crime numbers in Nassau County, so low. The country is experiencing low crime numbers. The one crime that is on the rise is hate crime. That SWAT sticker. It may not cause a physical harm to somebody, but it causes emotional damage to a community when it's painted on a wall. Guess what? No bail. They go out the door. We can't hold them. Those violating those probation and parole that we set the standards, no bail. They go back out. You heard Brian go through a bunch of the other crimes. So right now, the resources that we're putting into this is, and by the way, all of the discovery goes back several months that we've got over 2,000 cases that we had to gather up all this discovery information now and produce it in a certain time period, or the cases are going to get dismissed. So here's what I tell you. Will we be able to handle crime that's going to major crimes? Yes. We'll go after those burglars. We'll get those robbers. We'll make sure that we prevent and stop that. What's going to be affected, without a doubt, is quality of life. The quality of life in Nassau County will be affected and throughout the state because these low-level crimes, non-violent felonies that are walking out, which are all not nice people, okay, that are walking out, they're going to commit crimes in our neighborhoods that we have always expected not to see. We've always that quality of life that we want here in Nassau County. You pay a healthy amount of taxes. I live here too, and we want that quality of life here in Nassau County. That's going to be affected. And when I'm using my resources to chase it on one side, I'm losing it on the other side. But we don't make the laws here. They don't come from our local legislators. They come from Albany. And we're going to go after and do everything we can to make sure that we keep fighting that number and keep reducing that crime. But it's going to be a challenge. And you just heard from Brian, and that same challenge is in the district attorney's office too. 3 parts of the criminal justice system: the police, the enforcers, the corrections, and the prosecutors. All 3 of us are swimming upstream right now. All 3, trying to figure out how we're going to get to this and get behind it. The only way, and I said it on Fox and I'll say it here, we got to send a message to Albany and we got to tell them, you got to change it. And the answer is from that speaker is that we need more time to see how it works out. Tell that to the 27-year-old man that's dead in Suffolk County. And that's not going to be the first or the last. That is the first, or will not be the last, unfortunately, if we keep letting this go on in Nassau County. So we'll take any questions that you all have. Yes, sir.
So I'm going to ask a question that I already know the answer to. Of the 5,300 people who were arrested and brought to trial in Nassau County in 2018, that's the approximate number. How many people went to a jury decision of acquittal?
I think that percentage is less than 10%, less than 5%. We don't lose too many cases here in Nassau County to go to trial.
The acquittal rate was 0.
Better yet,
0. There were about 10%, a little bit less than that, ACODs, determined contemplation of dismissal. The commissioner was talking about having people go to treatment programs instead of having a conviction. That's an ACOD. So about 10% of those 5,300 people adjourned in contemplation of dismissal. About 81% or so actual convictions. So now we got 90% taken care of, another 10% things like mistrials and agreement not to prosecute, but 0 people were actually acquitted by jury for criminal offenses in Nassau County. I bring that up because while corrections officer was correct in pointing out that in our country, thank God, it is
we do a great job working with the district attorney, and then, of course, with the correction side of things, our probation department. Probation department is so overwhelmed right now because we're putting electronic monitoring braces. I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, individuals, both were arrested, both given electronic monitoring bracelets. They both cut them off within the first 2 hours, and they were on their way. Now we're trying to find them and trying to figure out what are we arresting them for? Well, we're going to arrest them for criminal mischief because they damaged our property. The only problem is they're going to get an appearance ticket and walk out the door again. And now they won't even have the ankle bracelet on unless the court orders it back again. It doesn't, look, they went way too far. They just took a broad brush and said, justice reform. And all of these things came into place. And it's going to affect us that way in our quality of life here. We'll be professionals. We'll do our job. We're the law and order people. That's what we do. But it's got to change, and it's got to change quick, not on the calendar evolving.
No doubt. On a personal level, I have several people have asked me if because I talk about the mental health aspect of it, the drug addiction part of it, because that's part of what corrections is supposed to do. Corrections is not supposed to be Shawshank or Oz, contrary to popular belief. Corrections means correcting something, correcting behavior. We have all of these programs that people can avail themselves of. And I have actually a personal vested interest in this because I have a brother who is several years older than me who suffers from schizophrenia. I've been dealing with this for about 40 years. Many years ago, before he finally acquiesced and got into mental health programs, he was arrested several times. He was a public safety problem, my own brother. And educated guy, he has a master's degree in architecture. In his mid-20s, he had some sort of a mental break, and we found out he was schizophrenic. He stole a truck. He did a couple of burglaries. This was about 40 years ago, like I said. Corrections actually helped him. The courts actually helped him. He was put into programs. He was forced years ago when Pilgrim State was still there. He was forced into Pilgrim State into these things where they leveled off his medications. When he was on his medication, he was a sharp, educated, middle-class guy. He knew exactly what he was doing. Unfortunately, his condition has deteriorated a little bit later on in life, and now he's at home. But when I talk to people who talk about this progressive idea that we're helping people here, we're getting people out of jail that don't belong in there, they're languishing in there, it's a false narrative. You're not helping anybody where, like the commissioner said, people that are getting arrested for these crimes, people that have mental health issues, drug problems, you're kicking them out on the street. They then become public safety problems. If you're walking down the street and you have some big guy coming running at you and he appears to be out of his mind, and I look at it from a different perspective. So over the course of my law enforcement career, you'll think, oh, he's a dangerous guy, he's a killer, he's this and that. That's somebody's kid that has a mental health problem that shouldn't be running up the street with a knife in his hand or punching people. He's a guy that needs help. These criminal justice reforms takes that blanket away from everybody. You can't force people into programs. We don't do, like I talked about Willowbrook and all that stuff before. You can't just commit people. It's against their constitutional rights. But when you're taking the safety net, the drug diversion programs, all of these different types of programs out in the courts, you're only putting public safety at risk. This is not fear mongering. This is not just conservative versus liberal mindset or ideologies. This is actual risk to public safety. The commissioner touched on the thing before. God forbid a woman gets raped in her home. There's a guy named Jed Painter. He's a assistant district attorney for Nassau County. He got up in front of the legislature and he painted. We have a Democratic county district attorney in Nassau County. He got up in the public in front of the legislature and said, if a woman gets raped in her home, they have to let, like he said, within 15 days of an arrest in the house. That woman say she calls her mother hysterical crying with the discovery stuff. They have to turn over the mother's name, address, phone number, email addresses, cell phone numbers, all of this stuff. I don't get the mindset where anybody thinks these are reforms that benefit the public on bail with the drugs and all that, how it affects the defender. This is just insanity. This has to change. The message has to be sent to Albany. And I have one of the handouts here, and I hope you all come up and get it. Like I said, I have the 4 pages of the crimes. I have a brief synopsis of what bail means. And I have all of our Long Island local state senators' telephone numbers on there. Please take it. Please get educated on it. Don't call up and say, Brian Sullivan told me to call you up and say, screw you. That's not what I'm here for. But you can tell them, Brian Sullivan, Pat Ryder educated me on what's really going on here. I want to see this fixed because this doesn't help anybody.
On that victim side, the district attorney has done, Jed Painter and the DA have done an excellent job on fighting against this. And actually all the DAs in the state of New York have. And they realize, now, they're realizing this has gone way too far. And they're trying to be creative in the fact that when you turn that information over, how we can create other ways to do that. I don't want to speak about that publicly on what that is, but they're working very hard to make sure that we protect our victims. Yes, sir.
I just came from the Police Commission's Council meeting right before this, and they did bail reform and the whole thing about bonding and everything like that. It's a horror. Well, I'm going to suggest maybe get the legislators maybe to write some sort of a form letter, because if it's easy that a resident can actually sign something that's already been created and then sent it on to the appropriate people everywhere, from the state senate, representatives, whatever, I think that would actually help this, because stuff has to be changed.
Absolutely.
Okay?
I agree. Thank you. Okay.
I think they actually respond to things like that.
I am out and about quite often in the county, and I run both sides, Republican, Democrat. I go wherever I'm asked to speak and give the facts. I can tell you this, that there is a concern and they know it, and I think they're all back there now trying to fight it. But again, it's coming from a very strong group up there that is saying you got to give it time. We don't need time. We need to fix something. We're here to protect our victims. That's our job, and that's not working out too well.
You hit the nail on the head. I was just going to say that this is an election year. This is an election year for the state senate, and I think a lot of people that were for this, or especially our local senators that all voted for the budget and therefore voted for all these reforms, not separate, they're backpedaling a lot now because they're up for election this year. We do live on Long Island, after all. It's moderate. We're a little bit more, we've always been more law and order oriented, but now, when the time comes, you got to answer to why you voted for this. And I'm sure, by all means, I'll work with every last one of them to fix this. Number one being public safety. But I'll tell you right now, a lot of them are concerned because they have an election coming up in November, and they got to answer for their actions. Yep. That's why we're here. That's why I have social media is a huge thing. I know, some people aren't involved in social media. I'm a little long in the tooth myself, but I've gotten to learn. I've gotten very angry on Facebook. Sometimes I get myself in trouble, but I don't care. I'm here 32 years. What, are you gonna fire me? I don't care. This is something that needs to be fixed.
Sir.
A while back, we had a presentation from the third precinct, and at that time they said, if we see something, we should dial 911, not the third precinct. Is that still the standard operating procedure?
Absolutely. Always call 911 first. We see something, say something, call 911. We work very closely here with the school and met the new superintendent. A good relationship with the ex-superintendent, and the security of the people in the children in your school here. One of the best school districts around about protecting your children, and I commend both of them for that. Not just because they're here, but it's truthful. But that information about when you see, call 911. If you call the precinct may not know all the time. You may be out there and see something that's going on. They might not know about it yet. It happens that way. That's why you call 911. The response comes. We handle the problem. Yes, sir.
Just have to fix the staff. Just have to text from somebody who knows. There were actually 12 of 5,300.
I thought my number was better, Dave, but I didn't want to correct you. Any other questions? So the speaker came out, Hastings, and he said we need to give it more time. And that's my point. Is that exactly that? And more time? Like I said, we've been doing criminal justice for a long time in this country. We learn from our mistakes. We're at extremely low crime rates in this country. Why would we go back and try to tweak something? I get justice reform in its more simplest forms and you grow from it. They just went out, went right through with a brush and landed it like that.
One other thing, I have called the local senators, all of them, and I've also, everybody who knows how to use Facebook, you can write on the senator's page, Facebook page, they all have one, but they think it's a good thing, and you can just show your objection to it, and I even put on Senator Cashman's page, a local senator, on Jesus Fine, Wayne,
Phillips, right.
Great, great person. And I even put a list of the crimes on there, and there are a lot of people writing on there, so they don't like to see that on their Facebook page because they're rah-rah,
Yep.
fans read that. So, and they don't take it off. And some people say, but it's up to the minority.
For the record, for Brian, you don't go home and write on the screen. That's,
No, you don't write.
The eraser doesn't work on the screen already. There is,
there you are.
they have, there's a bunch of things here. When you get a chance later on, I'll leave these up here, but there's a lot of news releases. There's a lot of things about our governor who has come out and said that this needs to be addressed, that Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the head of the Senate, said it needs to be addressed. Carl Heastie dug his heels in and he said, I'm very involved politically because I run the union and everything else. I'm always in Albany. I deal with these people all the time. They're digging their heels in. The one thing that I'm concerned about now with this is that it's a political football. And when it's a political football, all of us in the middle have the ball being thrown over our heads. And when you start getting involved with the Senate and the Assembly and the governor, everybody knows this needs to be fixed. What's the first thing everybody wants? They want cover. It wasn't me. And what am I getting out of it? That's politics. That's my opinion. That's not the commissioner's opinion. That's my opinion. I deal with it all the time. I've been dealing with it for 15 years in the union. But everybody's right now, it's all about CYA. Cover your ass. How do I get myself reelected? How do I make sure this doesn't stick to me? And what can I get out of it if we do decide to give up some ground and put judicial discretion or repeal?
Thank God the Cub Scouts left, Brian.
Yes. I was a little concerned when they were here before. I'm thinking I gotta tear up half of what I was going to say here. Cuomo was just reelected last year, right? So he's got 4 more terms. He's actually talking about running again now. I think for a 17th term or something like that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just one quick item. If I think there's a little bit more urgency now because the state is facing a $6 billion deficit. So if this isn't done or addressed in the next month or so, then it gets lost in budget negotiations, and it's going to be, this budget cycle is going to be particularly.
I've actually had
troublesome.
some
So
of
I
our
think-
local senators tell me that let's put some of these laws together. Let's take some of those laws off that four-page thing and put them back under bail and back under pretrial detention. And I argue back and forth. You can't just say I'm going to pick 10 to make it look good. There's 4 pages of nonsense here. But I've had conversations with some of these people in Albany, and they love putting things in under the budget because, and this goes back to when Pataki was the governor, because people think it doesn't stick to them. I want legislatively, I want tax relief for my school district. I want this. I want certain things in my district. I want my roads fixed. I want pork. And somebody else puts the thumb on their heads and says, all right, you're going to get that, but you're going to vote for this in the budget. These things like public safety, should not be anywhere in the budget of New York State. How is public safety and releasing alleged criminals pre-trial that could be potentially dangerous, why is that hidden with no public hearings in a budget process? Some of these same senators that I've spoken to are saying, well, maybe we could fix this in the budget. Let's take the 10 things and put it in the budget. Let's put judicial discretion in the budget. Stop with the budget already. These are things that the stakeholders need to be involved in what's going on, because you're only, pardon my language, you're only going to half-ass it. And we're going to be back here again next year talking about what's not working with that.
So let me just throw one thing out at you. You got a $6 billion deficit. How do you cut your deficit? You either cut services and you raise revenue. Watch out for legalized marijuana. That's next thing on the agenda.
No doubt.
It's going to raise a lot of money. We fought hard to make sure it does not, and we knocked it down. We did a report on it. You go to the county website. I had a committee that we're on. We wrote a very thorough report giving you the data. It shows you every state that had it failed. Increased homeless, increased crime, increased hospital visits, increased gang activity where the organized groups came in. She's against it. So justice reform has some, she's not for this bail reform. I spoke to her an hour before I got here again. She said, make sure they're clear and understand it. Now, she is not for bail reform. She is not for some of the justice reforms. So a lot of it's being looked at now.
She came out in the Daily News, actually, wrote an op-ed in the Daily News last week, came out against these reforms, and that this whole thing needs to be revisited, that there's a public safety issue and all of that. I'm not in a position where I can say one way or the other, because I'm in a semi-adversarial position with the county. I run the union, so we try to get along as best as we can. I try to get them to do certain things. They try to do certain things. This aspect, this bail reform, discovery reform, all these criminal justice reforms, this is not a local issue. This is not a Nassau County issue, and I'm very glad that the county executive came out against it. I'm glad she came out against it in the Daily News, and the commission told me today she's going to be on Fox and Friends tomorrow. Fox and Friends, we all know what their leaning is. So this is a state issue. This is a state legislative issue. This is the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor. This is a Senate that is being led around by the nose by Brooklyn, Queens, and Bronx progressives, and they're all under fear. The ones that are the moderates of being primaried the whole night, and I'll speak more on that political end of it. That everybody's afraid to make a move. They're afraid to stand up because you're going to be labeled a racist. You're going to be labeled a conservative. You're going to be labeled a fear monger. That's all nonsense. The proof is in the pudding here. This and all of the stuff that we've talked about, the crimes that people are walking out the door for, and the services that are no longer available to them, it's right in front of everyone's eyes. If anybody says you're a fearmonger or you're doing whatever or you're against progressive, tell them to go take a walk, because this is a public safety issue that has to be addressed, and it's a state public safety issue because that's where it came from.
The sheriff in Suffolk said it perfect. It's common sense. It's just common sense. You don't do this.
The sheriff in Suffolk County is a democratically elected sheriff in Nassau County. He's from Suffolk County. I'm sorry. He's worked for years on Rikers Island. He was actually one of the heads of their emergency response team. He came out very forcefully against this and said there are certain crimes that people should just not be walking out the door from that are covered under this no bail issue. And he's a Democrat minority sheriff. So that's very telling.
Colorado too.
Yep. New York, San Francisco, a lot of these things, like you said, Colorado. We had there was a legislative hearing last year in Nassau County where we all spoke about the county opting in about this marijuana stuff. We all got up and we spoke out against it. And there was actually, we spoke about statistics in Colorado, like the commissioner said, where that Mexican drug cartels were moving in all over Colorado and bringing cheaper marijuana in because the legalized stuff that was all being taxed, they're undercutting them all. So now you had the gang activity, Mexican, South American drug cartels coming in, selling everything else. It's amazing the whiplash that people don't even think about what goes on. So that's right.
No, I worked in the 80s back in, I know I'm a lot older than Brian, but I worked in the 79th precinct, in the 7-1 back in 1984, 85. And it was a revolving door, we used to call it. And the revolving door of that, you'd lock up a crack dealer, they go into jail, they'd be out the next one. You lock up somebody's gun, they go into jail, they'd be out the next day. That revolving door has come back. And when the revolving door had the problem, it brought morale down. Cops didn't give a hoot no more. They're like, what do I bother for? Upstate in New York right now, it's very hard for the upstate law enforcement agencies to even get their drugs tested in time. So it's almost like the fact that we've just legalized cocaine in upstate New York because we can't get to the labs and get it tested within the time period that's required. It's just cannot be done. So we do on the average 50 arrests a day here in Nassau County. So I come in on a Monday morning after being off probably, I got 150 arrests that they got to go back and get all that discovery within 15 days. Who are we fighting for now? We're not fighting for the victims anymore. We're just supporting the bad guys, the crooks.
Why is that? Why did they tend to
It's all part of the new discovery under that justice reform, that we want to make sure that before they go and they take that plea agreement, when they're sitting there at arraignment, that they have everything in front of them, that they have all the evidence to show that, okay, I need to take a plea. They know when they take a plea that they're wrong. They don't walk in and say, hey, get me the best deal you can. They don't do that when they're right. They fight it when they're right. So they come in and they take it, but now we got to turn it all over. And if I don't make the date and I don't make the time, out the door he goes.
It's all part of speedy trial. There is something out there about getting the speedy trial because they don't want people sitting around for a year or two or longer waiting for trials. But sitting around for 15 days, fix that. 15 days is absurd. And then one other thing, and I'm sorry, just prolong it if anybody has any other questions. One other thing that popped into my head with the discovery stuff that goes on, and because I've been talking so much about this, the potential for witness intimidation is incredible. When they're giving away within 15 days the rape victim's home address, her husband's name, her phone number, her email address, where she works, her play, all of the stuff, her gang members, her mother's address, all of that. Who's going to be coming forward when you have potentially a gang member that is this person that committed a horrendous crime against you, and all of your parents and your personal information, where you work, information is given to them within 15 days of the arrest? Who's coming forward? The witness intimidation is going to be incredible, and people are just going to shut up, and as the commissioner said, the quality of life is going to go right down the toilet.
Does that violate the rape shield law?
You tell me, because in New York State, and this was coming right from the DA's office, they have to give over every last bit of information to the defense, not necessarily the defendant, the defense. They have to be allowed access to the crime scene. And like I said, their personal information, their mother's information, all of that, it's right in the discovery.
And don't we have laws to protect rape victims that that information isn't supposed to be disclosed?
There is some information that gets redacted,
Right.
and again, to the credit of the Nassau County DA, they've come up with some creative ways to avoid that. Look, it was in there. We found a way to try to get around it. But again, we're spending so much time protecting victims that we're not going after and prosecuting the bad guys no more. We need to spend that time, but the point is, that's time that shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be turning it over. End of story.
I mean, but if it's a law that's contradicting an existing law, shouldn't somebody be filing some type of suit to at least have this?
So many of these challenges will come forward now in court. There was one just recently in Queens. I heard earlier tonight. So, but there are cases that's how case law is made, right? So we go into court, we have a challenge, we fight it. Now there's going to be case law, and we're going to go after it and see what we can change. That's going to force the change, but that takes time, a lot of time before you get into courts and doing case law changes. So unfortunately, we need to change it now.
One thing that I was asked several times was, can these legislators be held vicariously liable for their actions when these horrendous crimes are done? No, they have immunity from their acts of legislation. That I can't believe how many times I was asked that. Can I hold Cuomo responsible? Can I hold all these senators responsible if my rapist was let out and he comes back and kills me when he should have been remanded on no bail? No, it's like Congress. They're immune from all of their legislation. Good reason to become a politician. Any other questions? I thank you for your time. Thank you all have a good night.